Palamon, have you been fighting again with your cousin Archite? Oh, Moses, smell the roses. I bet I know what this is about. It's about a woman, isn't it? Yeah. You see, this is exactly what they want to do to you. They play one against the other. You can't let them manipulate you like that. You say that she's the Duke's unmarried sister-in-law. Ah, yes, forbidden love. And her name is Amelia. I don't know the woman, but she sounds quite fetching. Blast. Don't despair, my friend. I won't allow your love to go unrequited. You see, love is a spice with many tastes, a dizzying array of textures and moments. All right, let's start at the beginning and examine some of your questionable choices. First of all, why are you asking me why you and your cousin Archite agreed to fight for King Creon when you knew he was an evil tyrant? Well, that's like asking, why do birds suddenly appear every time you walk through the forest with a handful of birdseed? Are you really that surprised that just like me and you, they long to be fed too? You want to know why you only saw the woman of your dreams after you were imprisoned and weren't free to court her and tell her of your feelings? Well, why do stars fall down from the sky after a meteor shower? How am I supposed to answer that? If I were you, I'd just be grateful that every time you see Princess Amelia walk by your jail cell, you have the opportunity to drink in her beauty until you're liberated. And I'm sure that on the day when you can finally tell Amelia how you feel about her, you'll thank your lucky stars that you were born, and I know it's going to feel like a dream come true. But before any of that happens, you'll have to contend with the jailer's mad daughter. That is why you need to wait, because she spread a rumor that you've gotten all the girls in town with child. The woman is in love with you. Didn't you ever wonder why she wants to follow you all around? So take my advice and nip this rumor in the bud. Then and only then will you be free to say to the princess, "Lovely Amelia, I want to know if you feel just like me, because I long to be close to you." In Michael Bay's romantic 2001 war drama Pearl Harbor, two best friends go to war and fight bravely together, but have a falling out when they both fall in love with the same woman. In William Shakespeare and John Fletcher's romantic play The Two Noble Kinsmen, two best friends go to war and fight bravely together, but have a falling out when they both fall in love with the same woman. And while more people may have seen the Pearl Harbor movie, remember that it did feature Kate Beckinsale. Perhaps things would have been different had she also appeared in The Two Noble Kinsmen, so let's take a look at the plot. The play opens in Greece when three distressed queens come to Athens and plead with Theseus and Hippolyta, the rulers of Athens, to avenge the deaths of their husbands by the cruel tyrant Creon of Thebes. Not only does Creon kill the three kings, but he also refuses to allow their widows to give them proper burials. Urged on by Hippolyta and her sister Amelia, Theseus agrees to wage war against Creon. Meanwhile, back in Thebes, a pair of cousins and close friends by the names of Palamon and Archite are bound by duty and family connections to fight for their uncle Creon, even though they are disgusted by his tyranny. In a hard-fought battle, Palamon and Archite fight like courageous and valiant warriors. However, the Thebans are defeated by Theseus and his troops. Palamon and Archite are imprisoned and only consoled by the fact that the two of them have each other to lean on and mentally resign themselves to their fate. But their fortitude is almost instantly forgotten when they view through their prison window the lovely Princess Amelia, Hippolyta's sister. And even though they both fall in love with her at first sight, Palamon argues that since he saw her first, Archite should deny his feelings. But Archite says it doesn't matter which one of them saw her first. He deserves her just as much as Palamon, and their lifelong friendship turns into a bitter rivalry. For some unexplained reason, Archite alone is released and brought to the Duke. However, he's banished from Athens, but cannot bear the thought of leaving Amelia, even though the two of them have never spoken. And so he disguises himself and stays in Athens. At the same time, he enters and wins a local wrestling contest and is happily appointed to be Amelia's bodyguard. Meanwhile, the jailer's daughter has fallen in love with Palamon, even though he's barely even acknowledged her existence, and she helps him to escape. She follows him, but he ignores her as he's still completely obsessed with Amelia, to whom he's still never spoken. Palamon lives in the forest, but is still chained up and has had nothing to eat. Suddenly, he meets Archite, and the two argue over Amelia and what they should do about their situation. In the meantime, Archite offers to bring Palamon food, drink, shirts, tools to free himself, and battle armaments so that they can challenge each other to a fair fight to the death over Amelia. The jailer's daughter feels forsaken by Palamon and begins to go mad. She sings and babbles in the forest where she meets a troupe of local countrymen who want to perform a Morris dance to entertain the Duke and his wife. Gerald, the local schoolmaster, invites the jailer's mad daughter to join their performance. While Theseus and Hippolyta are hunting, Gerald hails them, and they agree to watch the rustics perform for them. The royal couple is pleased with their performance and rewards them handsomely. As promised, Archite returns with the food, drink, and other items he promised his cousin. After Palamon nourishes himself, the two of them reminisce and prepare to fight. However, just then Theseus and his hunting party arrive, and he's furious that they would enter into such a confrontation without his permission. He orders Palamon and Archite to be arrested and executed, but Hippolyta and Amelia are sympathetic and intervene on their behalf, and Theseus agrees instead to have the two men fight in a public tournament for Amelia's hand. Each warrior is allowed 3 knights to assist them, and the loser, along with his companions, will be executed. Meanwhile, the jailer finds his daughter with the help of some friends who try to restore her mental health. On the advice of a doctor, the jailer encourages her former suitor to pretend that he is Palamon so that she will gradually accept him as her true love, and his devotion eventually wins her over. Prior to the tournament, Archite prays to Mars that he will win the battle, Palamon prays to Venus that he will marry Amelia, and Amelia prays to Diana that she will wed the one who loves her best. Each prayer is granted. Archite wins the combat, but is thrown from his horse and dies, but not before he begs his cousin's forgiveness and asks Palamon to wed Amelia. When we return, we'll look at some of the major characters in The Two Noble Kinsmen. Unlike a lot of Shakespeare's history plays, The Two Noble Kinsmen has relatively few main characters in it, so let's take a look at some of the more significant ones. First, we have Archite and Palamon, the title characters. Both of them are from Thebes. They're cousins to one another and also best friends. Besides being valiant warriors, they despise their uncle, King Creon, who is a ruthless tyrant, and although he's unseen in the play, he's the catalyst that causes all the action to take place. Creon slew 3 kings in his wars, and their widowed queens approach Duke Theseus of Athens and his bride-to-be Hippolyta just as they are about to wed. Hippolyta moves her fiancé to take immediate action and get justice for these queens who want their husbands' bones returned to them. Hippolyta's younger sister Amelia is a beautiful young virgin princess. When the imprisoned Archite and Palamon see Amelia, they both fall in love with her instantly without even speaking to her or her ever meeting either one of them. Yet, because she is a princess, her role is to honor her duty to the Duke, and she agrees to marry one of them in order to keep the peace. When Archite and Palamon are imprisoned, the jailer's daughter falls in love with Palamon, even though it's unrequited. Fortunately, with the doctor's help, the jailer's daughter agrees to marry the wooer, who loves her and is a friend to her father. And finally, we have Gerald the schoolmaster, who leads the cast in a Morris dance for the benefit of Duke Theseus, Hippolyta, and the court. When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes in The Two Noble Kinsmen. Shakespeare uses madness and jealousy as plot devices in The Two Noble Kinsmen, but those are not really very unique. We see them both in Othello, Hamlet, and King Lear. But what truly is unique in this play is Shakespeare's use of prayers to mythological gods as almost a supernatural intervention. Before the final showdown, Arcite prays to Mars, the god of war, for him to be victorious in the battle. Palamon, on the other hand, prays to Venus, the goddess of love, that he should win Amelia's hand. And Amelia herself prays to Diana, the goddess of chastity, that since she is a virgin, she either stays that way or marries the person who loves her best. Interestingly enough, though, all three of their prayers are answered. Arcite wins the battle, but Palamon wins Amelia, and she winds up with the one who loved her the most, or at least loved her the first. Shakespeare is fond of using banishment in his plays to separate lovers, like Romeo in Romeo and Juliet, Valentine in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and Posthumus in Cymbeline, as well as patriots like Henry Bolingbroke and Thomas Mowbray in Richard II, and Kent in King Lear. In The Two Noble Kinsmen, even though Arcite is banished, he can't resist staying in Athens in order to be near Amelia. And finally, we have two love triangles. The first one is Arcite, Palamon, and Amelia, and the second one is Palamon, the jailer's daughter, and the wooer. Fortunately, both of these triangles are resolved to everyone's satisfaction, well, except Arcite, who gets crushed by a horse. As far as memorable scenes go, let's take a look at three. First, we have Act 2, Scene 2, in which Arcite and Palamon first see Amelia through their prison window, and both of them instantly fall in love with her. One would think that two best friends would have handled the situation better than to become mortal enemies over a woman who doesn't even know they exist. Next, in Act 3, Scene 5, we have Gerald the schoolmaster leading a troupe of country gentlemen and wenches in a Morris dance featuring the jailer's mad daughter. The performance is witnessed by the nobility of Athens, who applaud their efforts. This is quite a beautiful visual high point of the play and features much festive accompanying music. And finally, in Act 3, Scene 6, we have a great deal of action when Arcite and Palamon are fighting over Amelia in the woods and are discovered by Theseus, Hippolyta, Amelia, and their train. This forces Theseus to devise a resolution wherein the two cousins agree to a public fight with Amelia's hand going to the victor and death to the loser and his three knights. Meanwhile, poor Amelia finds herself the unhappy prize of the competing lovers' contest. When we return, we'll look at some of the major themes running through The Two Noble Kinsmen. As we know, some of Shakespeare's plays are considered problem plays. If there's a problem with The Two Noble Kinsmen, it's that two best friends fall in love with the same woman and are willing to kill each other over her without ever even speaking to her. This could hardly be called love. It's more accurately headstrong or midsummer madness, coupled with instant infatuation. Of course, the jailer's daughter is also infatuated with Palamon, although she also calls it love. Luckily for her, the wooer really does love her and pretends to be Palamon, and the two of them decide to wed. We never really find out if Amelia loves either of the two noble kinsmen. Her main motivation for agreeing to marry the victor of the contest is to get them to calm down, to prevent the two of them from killing each other, or from having both of them die according to Theseus' decree. But since this is considered a romance play or possibly a comedy, the romantic in me wants to believe that Palamon and Amelia will live happily ever after, especially now that she actually knows who he is. There are several different family dynamics in The Two Noble Kinsmen. First, we have Arcite and Palamon, who are not only cousins but also best friends. But apparently the old saying that blood is thicker than water flies right out the window when there's a beautiful princess at stake. Duke Theseus and Hippolyta get married during the course of the play, but we really don't see a lot of romantic affection between the two of them. Hippolyta and Amelia are sisters, but it's obvious that Amelia and her childhood friend Flavinia were much closer than Amelia is to her own sister. We also see the jailer and his daughter who goes mad over Palamon, but fortunately her father does everything he can to help her make a better match with the wooer. When it comes to honor and duty, that's what drives Arcite and Palamon to fight for their uncle, King Creon of Thieves, even though they recognize that he's a ruthless tyrant. Amelia's role is also one of honor and duty. As the chaste sister-in-law of the Duke, she understands that her duty is to marry as a means of creating peace and alliance that benefits Athens. Fortunately, we see at the end of the play the dying Arcite honorably granting his noble cousin Palamon the privilege of marrying Amelia. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in The Two Noble Kinsmen. It truly is a blessing that this incredible play was authenticated in 1634 so that none of the magnificent writing would be lost to posterity. Let's first look at Act 1, Scene 1. When the first queen realizes that Theseus is willing to help the widows by going to war, but first wants to consummate his marriage, she wisely realizes that once he's engaged on his wedding night, he's hardly going to be thinking about helping some distressed queens get their dead husband's bones back from a battlefield. Listen to how she tactfully approaches the subject using some of Shakespeare's most beautiful language. The more proclaiming our suit shall be neglected when her arms, able to lock Jove from a synod, shall by warranting moonlight corslet thee. Oh, when her twinning cherries shall their sweetness fall upon thy tasteful lips, what wilt thou think of rotten kings or blubbered queens? What care or what thou feel'st not, what thou feel'st being able to make Mars spurn his drum? Oh, if thou couch but one night with her, every hour in it will take hostage of thee for 100, and thou shalt remember nothing more than what this banquet bids thee to. In Act 3, Scene 6, Amelia tries to make peace and find a way so that the two cousins don't have to die. She fears that women will curse her for being the cause of these two noble princesses' death. Here's what she proposes to her brother-in-law. O Duke Theseus, the goodly mothers that have groaned for these, and all the longing maids that ever loved, if your vows stand, shall curse me and my beauty, and in their funeral songs for these two cousins despise my cruelty, and cry woe worth me, till I am nothing but the scorn of women. For heaven's sake, save their lives and banish 'em. I also want to look at Act 5, Scene 5, where Amelia contemplates her sad plight, wherein two brave princes will fight over her. She knows that one will win her hand and the other will lose his life, and so she asks, "Is this winning? Oh, all you heavenly powers, where is your mercy? But that your wills have said it must be so, and charge me live to comfort this unfriended, this miserable prince that cuts away a life more worthy from him than all women, I should and would die too." And finally, I love Palamon's words to the three knights on the chopping block with him in Act 5, Scene 6, when he reflects on giving up his life after losing the contest. It reminds me of the speech Edward the Black Prince makes to Lord Audley in Edward III, when he thinks he's going to die in battle. There's many a man alive that hath outlived the love of the people. Yea, in the selfsame state stands many a father with his child. Some comfort we have by so considering. We expire and not without men's pity. To live still, have their good wishes. We prevent the loathsome misery of age, beguile the gout and rheum that in lag hours attend for grey approachers. We come towards the gods young and unwappered, not halting under crimes many and stale, that sure shall please the gods sooner than such to give us nectar with them, for we are more clear spirits. My dear kinsmen, whose lives for this poor comfort are laid down, you have sold 'em too cheap. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in the Two Noble Kinsmen, along with correlations to some of the other Shakespeare plays. As I've said before in some of the other videos in this series, a turning point is when an event takes place that affects what direction the action will take and the outcome of the story. With that in mind, let's take a look at three major turning points in the Two Noble Kinsmen. The first one takes place before the play even begins. King Creon of Thebes has been successful in battle against 3 slain kings, yet he refuses to allow their wives to claim their fallen bodies and give them proper funeral services. This results in the 3 queens interrupting Theseus and Hippolyta's wedding plans and Athens going to war against Thebes. Of course, this also results in Arcite and Palamon going to war and being captured by the Athenians and thus seeing Emilia. And that brings us to our second turning point, which takes place in Act 2, Scene 2. Palamon immediately tells Arcite that he's seen the woman of his dreams. Normally, a best friend would say something like, "Wow, she's really beautiful. You should introduce yourself to her." But no, instead, he decides that he's going to throw away a lifelong friendship and go after the same woman that he didn't even know existed 30 seconds ago. And the worst part is, Palamon still winds up with Emilia, and Arcite just winds up dead, which brings us to the final turning point. In Act 5, Scene 6, which is the final scene of the entire play, we learn that Arcite was thrown from his horse, which landed on him and left him near death. He's borne by attendees and brought in to ask Palamon for forgiveness and to take Emilia as his wife just before Arcite dies. As I indicated, it's a bittersweet ending for a comedy. Now, let's take a look at some of the many correlations between the Two Noble Kinsmen and some of the other Shakespeare plays. The jailer's daughter goes mad because of unrequited love for Palamon. In Hamlet, Ophelia goes mad because of unrequited love for Hamlet, and also the fact that Hamlet stabbed her father Polonius to death by accident. And also, like Ophelia, the jailer's daughter sings crazy songs and says nonsensical things in her madness. The 3 distressed queens all kneel to Duke Theseus, urging him to assist their request to retrieve their husband's bones. Later on in the play, Hippolyta, Emilia, and Pirithous all kneel to Duke Theseus, pleading for mercy for Arcite and Palamon. We've seen a lot of other kneeling scenes, including Isabel and Mariana in Measure for Measure, Adriana and Luciana in the Comedy of Errors, Volumina, Virgilia, and Valeria in Coriolanus, the Duchess of York and Aumerle in Richard II, and the Duchess of York, Queen Elizabeth, and former Queen Margaret in Richard III. Since the 3 queens have all lost their husbands in the same conflict, they plead to Duke Theseus for assistance, and Hippolyta and Emilia bond with them. In All's Well That Ends Well, Helen, Diana, and her mother all bond together to expose the lecherous Bertram. In Measure for Measure, Isabel and Mariana bond together to expose the lecherous Lord Angelo. And in Richard III, the Duchess of York and Queen Elizabeth bond together to confront Richard for having the 2 princes murdered in the Tower. We meet Duke Theseus of Athens and Hippolyta just as they are about to get married. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, we meet Duke Theseus of Athens and Hippolyta just after they've gotten married. In Act 3, Scene 5, Gerald, the schoolmaster, leads a troupe of country gentlemen and wenches in a Morris dance performed for the Duke and his bridal party. We also heard references to Morris dances by the Dauphin in Henry V, by the Duke of York in Henry VI Part 2, and by Lavache in All's Well That Ends Well. Archite wins a wrestling contest and becomes Emilia's bodyguard. In As You Like It, Orlando wins a wrestling match, impressing and eventually winning Rosalind, and in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Pericles wins a contest and impresses and wins Thaisa. Emilia reminisces about her innocent childhood friendship with Flavina. In Much Ado About Nothing, Hero and Beatrice are both best friends and cousins. In As You Like It, Rosalind and Celia are both best friends and cousins. And in The Merry Wives of Windsor, Mistress Page and Mistress Ford are as thick as thieves. Archite and Palamon are both best friends and cousins. Theseus and Pirithous are also best friends. We also see other best friends in other Shakespeare plays, like Valentine and Proteus in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and Romeo and Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet. Theseus gives Archite and Palamon two different punishments for the same crime, just like Richard II did to Henry Bolingbroke and Thomas Mowbray in Richard II. The jailer's daughter falls in love with Palamon, but her love is unrequited, and as a result, she goes mad. Ophelia falls in love with Hamlet, but her love is also unrequited, and she goes mad after Hamlet accidentally slays her father. The jailer's daughter agrees to marry her father's choice of the wooer for her husband, just like Miranda does in The Tempest, Thaisa does in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and Catherine of Valois does in Henry V. Archite returns from banishment because he's in love with Emilia. In Romeo and Juliet, Romeo returns from banishment because he's in love with Juliet. In King Lear, Kent returns from banishment because of loyalty to the king. In Richard II, Henry Bolingbroke returns from banishment in order to get back his deceased father's lands. And in Richard III, Queen Margaret ignores her banishment to France and remains in England to curse Richard and the usurping nobility. In The Two Noble Kinsmen, the jailer's daughter witnesses an unseen shipwreck. In Twelfth Night, Viola and Sebastian come ashore in Illyria after surviving an unseen shipwreck. In The Tempest, Prospero and Miranda come ashore on an island after an unseen shipwreck. In Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Pericles is washed ashore in Pentapolis after an unseen shipwreck. In The Winter's Tale, Shepherd rescues Perdita after witnessing an unseen shipwreck. And in The Comedy of Errors, Aegeon, Emilia, their twin sons, and the Dromio twins are all rescued at sea after an unseen shipwreck. The jailer's daughter and Palamon both nearly faint from hunger. In Henry VI Part 2, Jack Cade nearly faints from hunger. And As You Like It, Celia, Orlando, and Adam nearly all faint from hunger. In Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Pericles nearly faints from hunger, and in Cymbeline, Imogen nearly faints from hunger. The Two Noble Kinsmen begins with a prologue, just like the plays Romeo and Juliet, Henry VIII, and Troilus and Cressida. The Duke and his train are hunting when they stumble across Archite and Palamon, who are illegally fighting in the woods. In Titus Andronicus, Emperor Saturninus is hunting when he stumbles upon his murdered brother in the woods. Palamon says that Archite got the unseen Lord Steward's daughter with child. In The Merchant of Venice, Lorenzo says that Lancelot got an unseen and unnamed Moor with child, and in Measure for Measure, Lucio says that he got an unseen Kate Keepdown with child. Emilia, who's faced with a conundrum that one of the two noble kinsmen will have to die in order for her to get a husband, rhetorically asks, "Is this winning?" In The Life and Death of King John, the newlywed Lady Blanche, whose husband is going to war against her uncle, says, "No matter who wins, I lose." And in Antony and Cleopatra, Octavia finds herself in the same boat when her brother Octavius Caesar goes to war against her husband, Mark Antony. And finally, Duke Theseus asks Emilia to marry in order to create a peace between the two noble kinsmen. In The Life and Death of King John, Lady Blanche is asked to marry in order to create peace between England and France. The same is true of Lady Catherine of Valois in Henry V and Lady Bona in Henry VI, Part 3. And in Richard III, Queen Elizabeth asks her daughter Elizabeth to marry in order to create a peace between the houses of York and Lancaster. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts about the two noble kinsmen. In preparing to do this episode, I did some research and this is what I found. The Two Noble Kinsmen was first performed around 1613 or 1614, just 2 years before Shakespeare's death in 1616, and is most likely his last play. However, it wasn't his alone. It was a collaboration with John Fletcher, incidentally with whom he also co-wrote Henry VIII, and were that not enough, the two also collaborated on another lost play called Cardenio. Who knows, if we're lucky, maybe someday somebody will find that play and I'll do an episode about that one. Although it's hard to be sure, it's believed by some that Shakespeare wrote Acts 1 and 5, and Fletcher wrote Act 2, Scene 1, and Act 3, Scenes 1 and 2. But as far as which of them wrote the rest of the play, it's still a bit foggy. The Two Noble Kinsmen was inspired by Geoffrey Chaucer's The Knight's Tale, which is the first of 24 stories in a collection called the Canterbury Tales, which was written between 1387 and 1400. The Canterbury Tales were created by a bunch of pilgrims who were journeying from London to Canterbury and used a storytelling contest to pass the time as they traveled. However, Chaucer based The Knight's Tale on a previous work by Giovanni Boccaccio entitled Tessiada, which was written between 1340 and 1341. Shakespeare and Fletcher remained very faithful to Chaucer's work, although they compressed the time frame from many years into a relatively short period of time, and Fletcher completely invented the story of the jailer's daughter and her infatuation with Palamon. And while the play doesn't explain why Arcite was freed, the poem explains that a childhood friend of his named Protheus, who was now a duke, was visiting Athens and beseeched Theseus to release Arcite. Theseus agreed on the condition that he never return to Athens. And finally, upon watching Tim Nance's excellent YouTube video on the Two Noble Kinsmen, I took his advice and also researched Geoffrey Chaucer's The Knight's Tale and realized that in Chaucer's poem, after Arcite is banished, he returns years later to Athens because he's still in love with Emilia, although Chaucer calls her Emily. But get this, he works for Theseus as a servant named Philostrate and becomes a squire. When we return, we'll look at some of the excellent actors in the 2018 Shakespeare's Globe version of the Two Noble Kinsmen. But before we do, ask yourself this. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Theseus and Hippolyta are attended by a master of the revels who makes entertainment recommendations for their wedding. His name is Philostrate. So, could this character indeed be Arcite from the Two Noble Kinsmen in disguise, waiting to make his love known to Emilia? Well, in the words of Fats Waller, one never knows, do one? As I mentioned in episode 30, the BBC Shakespeare collection wasn't completed until 1985, and Edward III wasn't authenticated until about 10 years later. As a result, it wasn't included in the 37-play DVD collection. The only other play that wasn't included was The Two Noble Kinsmen, which I figured was also authenticated after the BBC completed its project. However, when I was preparing to do this episode, I checked to see when The Two Noble Kinsmen was first authenticated and was surprised to find out that it had been authenticated in 1634. So I have no idea why it wasn't included in the BBC Shakespeare DVD collection. Perhaps it was because it was thought by some that Shakespeare wrote less than half the play, as was the case with Edward III. But we may never know for sure. Fortunately, it was produced through Opus Arte by the Globe Theatre in 2018. Not only that, but the performance is outstanding. If you love Shakespeare, by all means, you'll want to add this to your collection. You can find it at shop.shakespearesglobe.com/collections/DVDs. In appreciation for their efforts, I'd like to identify all of the actors here. Archite was played by Brian Dick. Palamon was played by Paul Stocker. Theseus was played by Aku Udiki. Hippolyta was played by Moyo Akandi. Emilia was played by the lovely Alora Torsia. Pirithous was played by Matt Henry Mbe. The jailer was played by Andy Cryer. The jailer's daughter was played by Francesca Mills. The wooer was played by John Trenchard. The schoolmaster, Gerald, was played by Jos Van Tyler. The first queen and doctor were both played by Sue Devaney. The second queen was played by Melissa James. The third queen was played by Kat Ross Martin. The production was directed for the stage by Barry Rudder Obey, and the screenplay was directed by Ian Russell. Now stay tuned for today's trivia challenge, which is called My Kingdom for a Horse. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called My Kingdom for a Horse. Identify the Shakespeare plays in which these horses are mentioned and their respective owners. Number 1, Roan Barbary. Number 2, Grey Capulet. And number 3, Galathe. When we return, I'll have the answers for you, and we'll finish up with some relevant lessons from the two noble kinsmen. Okay, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called My Kingdom for a Horse. You are to identify the Shakespeare plays in which these horses are mentioned and their respective owners. Number 1, Roan Barbary. That was Richard II in Richard II. Number 2, Grey Capulet. That was Sir Andrew Aguecheek in Twelfth Night. And number 3, Galathe. That was Hector in Troilus and Cressida. Now let's finish up with some relevant lessons from the two noble kinsmen. First, keep your priorities straight. Sure, it's not unusual for two men to fall in love with the same woman, but it usually happens after they've already met her. Neither Archite nor Palamon had ever even spoken to Emilia when they turned their mutual love into deadly hatred for one another. Certainly that animosity was premature, and they could have waited to see what Emily had to say about her interest in either of them. Second, in business, collaborations are often better than partnerships. A partnership is like a marriage and virtually as difficult to get out of one. William Shakespeare and John Fletcher collaborated to make an excellent play from a Geoffrey Chaucer poem, as well as on Henry V, but they weren't joined at the hip. Fletcher produced an enormous body of work on his own, and also collaborated with other writers. And while his works may not have been as memorable as Shakespeare's, it certainly didn't hurt either of them to work together on this magnificent play. Still, it's nice to have the artistic freedom to pursue your own interests when others don't share your vision. And finally, remember Occam's razor, which states, the simplest solution is usually the best. Palamon saw Emilia first and wound up marrying her. Had Archite just been happy for his cousin, the couple still could have wed, but he would have wound up alive and in a better position to love another day. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you so much for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when an Athenian man's generosity ends when he discovers that his beneficiaries are nothing but false friends.